The storage auction house in Reno smelled like dust and old motor oil. 40 people stood in a loose semicircle around Unit 214, their breath fogging in the cold morning air. Marcus Webb stood at the back, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, watching the auctioneer slice through the padlock. The door rolled up. Inside, a few cardboard boxes, a rusted bike frame, a broken lamp, and in the corner, a large metal can, the kind used for industrial paint or roofing tar, sealed shut and clearly filled with something heavy. 5 minutes, folks, the auctioneer barked. Take a look, no touching. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Bidding opened at $10. Marcus had been coming to these auctions for 6 months, ever since he lost his warehouse job and needed something, anything, to fill the hours and maybe make rent. He'd learned that most units were exactly what they looked like, garbage. But he'd also learned that people get lazy, and sometimes the ugliest, heaviest, most overlooked thing in a unit was overlooked for a reason. 15, someone called. 20, said a heavy-set woman near the front, already losing interest. The can sat there, dull gray, dented on one side, a thick layer of grime around the rim where something had once been poured in and left to harden. 25. 35, Marcus said. Nobody else bid. The can wasn't worth the gas to haul it away, and everyone could see that. The auctioneer slapped his clipboard. Sold. $35, Unit 214, to the man who apparently needs a paperweight. More laughter. Marcus paid in cash, signed the slip, and loaded the can into the bed of his truck himself, grunting under its weight. It had to be at least 80 pounds. Solid. Dense. Whoever filled it with concrete had done a thorough job. Driving home, he turned the can's story over in his mind. People didn't fill a perfectly good paint can with concrete for no reason. Concrete was cheap, but it was also permanent. Once it set, you couldn't easily get anything back out without breaking the container. That meant one of two things: either someone wanted to dispose of something by burying it in cement, or someone wanted to hide something inside the concrete itself, betting nobody would bother to break it open. He'd seen stranger things in storage units. Found a unit once with nothing but a locked briefcase that turned out to be empty, somebody's bad luck, not his profit. Bought a unit with what looked like junk furniture and found $400 taped under a drawer. Storage auctions were a lottery, and most tickets lost. But this can nagged at him. He grabbed a cold chisel and a sledgehammer from his toolbox, put on safety glasses, and started at the seam where the lid had been crimped shut, probably years ago, judging by the rust. The first few strikes did nothing but dent the metal further. He repositioned, found a weak point near the bottom rim, and swung harder. On the fifth hit, the metal split with a groan, and a chunk of gray concrete cracked loose and thudded onto the tarp. Dust hung in the garage light. Marcus coughed, wiped his glasses, and kept going. He worked the chisel into the crack, levering more concrete away in chunks. It was slow, deliberate work. An hour passed, then closer to 2. His arms ached. Twice he almost gave up, telling himself this was exactly the kind of waste of time his ex-wife used to warn him about, chasing junk for a payday that never came. It made a different sound, a dull clink, metal on metal, muffled by the surrounding stone. Marcus knelt down, heart picking up despite himself, and worked more carefully now, chipping away smaller pieces instead of swinging hard. Bit by bit, the gray crumbled away to reveal something dark and rectangular buried near the can's center, wrapped in what looked like heavy plastic sheeting, now brittle and yellowed with age. He pulled the object free, concrete dust raining off it, and set it on the workbench. The plastic wrap had cracked in places, and underneath, he could see the corner of something metallic, a small, heavy box, the size of a large book, with a keyhole on the front. A lockbox. Sealed inside 100 pounds of concrete, inside a sealed metal can, inside a forgotten storage unit that someone had stopped paying rent on years ago. Marcus sat back on an overturned bucket, staring at it. Whoever had done this hadn't just been hiding the box, they'd been making absolutely sure nobody would ever casually find it. Concrete didn't dissolve. Concrete didn't rust open. Concrete just sat there, dense and ugly and unremarkable, exactly the kind of thing that got auctioned off for $35 while everyone laughed. Inside, wrapped in another layer of plastic to keep out moisture, were stacks of cash, not loose bills, but bundled, banded stacks, the paper slightly faded with age but intact. Beneath the cash sat a small velvet pouch, and inside that, a handful of gold coins, the kind collectors kept in protective sleeves, along with a folded sheet of paper that had survived the damp in surprisingly good condition. Marcus's hands were shaking now, not from the cold of the garage but from something closer to disbelief. He counted the cash slowly, twice, laying it out in stacks on the workbench. It came to just under $18,000. The coins, he didn't know the value of yet, but even at a glance, gold coins from a private collection weren't nothing. The folded paper turned out to be a handwritten letter, the ink smudged but legible, dated more than a decade earlier. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, more like a note someone had written to themselves, or perhaps to whoever eventually found it, explaining in a few short lines that this was money they didn't trust banks with, money meant for someone they'd lost touch with, sealed away as insurance against a world they no longer believed was safe. There was no name. No clear next step. Just cash, coins, and a story Marcus would never fully know. He sat in his garage past midnight, the broken can and scattered concrete chunks around him, staring at thousands of dollars that, by law, technically belonged to him now. Storage auction terms made that clear. Every state had its own rules, but in most cases, once a unit was sold and emptied, the contents belonged to the buyer. The lawyer's advice was practical. Legally, Marcus was almost certainly in the clear. The unit had gone through proper auction channels, the previous tenant had defaulted and forfeited rights to the contents, and there was no name or claimant attached to the cash. But the lawyer also gently suggested that Marcus consider what kind of person he wanted to be walking away from this. There was no requirement to search for the original owner, but there also wasn't anything stopping him from trying, if it would let him sleep easier. Marcus thought about the people at the auction laughing at him. $35 for a doorstop, a paperweight, a slab of useless concrete nobody else wanted. He thought about how close he'd come to not bidding at all, talked out of it by his own doubts the same way everyone else had been talked out of it by their eyes. In the end, he kept the money. He paid off 2 months of back rent, fixed his truck's transmission, and set the rest aside, more cautious with it than he'd ever been with anything in his life. The gold coins he had appraised, worth another $6,000 on top of the cash. He never did find out who had poured concrete around a fortune and abandoned it in a 10 by 10 storage unit in Reno, Nevada. Some mysteries just stayed mysteries. But every time he passed a storage auction lot afterward, he found himself lingering a little longer over the ugliest, heaviest, most overlooked thing in every unit, the items nobody wanted, the things that made people laugh and walk away. Because sometimes, he'd learned, the things people laughed at were exactly the things worth a second look.